I discovered the family secret I was never meant to know, and it changed everything. Reddit stories. I used to think I knew my family. Every creak in the hallway, every framed photograph on the staircase, every familiar smell that rose from the kitchen on Sundays. I thought it all told the story of who we were. Mom with her gentle humming as she folded laundry. Dad with his silent sternness broken only when he watched old westerns, and me, the kid who always felt like he had wandered into a life already in motion. Still, it was a life with enough routine and repetition that I mistook it for truth. But the thing about family is this: what you see every day isn't always the whole picture. Sometimes, what you don't see, what you were never meant to see, is the part that matters the most. It began with a box. A plain, unassuming cardboard box, buried beneath holiday decorations in the attic. I wasn't snooping, not really. I'd gone up looking for a string of lights because Mom insisted the ones on the porch had too many bulbs out to be festive. She said it like she believed in the magic of fairy lights, as though twinkling LEDs could patch up the hollowness that had crept into our house since Grandma died. Maybe she thought if the house looked cheerful enough, the silence wouldn't feel so loud. So there I was, 1 foot buried in itchy pink insulation, the other on a wobbly beam, pulling at plastic tubs of Easter wreaths and 4th of July flags when I saw it. No markings, no tape, just a flap folded over and collecting dust. It was the only thing up there that didn't smell like mildew or mothballs. Something about it felt off, like it didn't belong with the rest of the holiday clutter. I should have walked away. I should have grabbed the lights and shut the attic door. But I opened the box. Inside were letters. Dozens of them, all neatly tied in blue ribbon, yellowed with age and written in a looping cursive I didn't recognize. Not my dad's. Not my mom's either. The paper was thin, the kind you'd find in old stationery sets, and each letter started the same way: my dearest Eli. That stopped me. My name, Ayla. But the handwriting wasn't familiar, and my parents never called me that in letters. Hell, they barely texted me, let alone wrote things down by hand. Curiosity prickled up my spine. I untied the ribbon and picked a letter from the middle of the pile. The date at the top read August 12, 1997. That was 6 years before I was born. My eyes skipped the first few lines until a sentence caught me like a punch. I can't believe we're keeping this from him. Someday he'll ask. And when he does, what will we say? I read those words 3 times. My stomach went cold. I read the entire letter, and then another and another, until my fingers ached from gripping the fragile pages. Each one painted a picture I didn't understand. Letters exchanged between 2 people hiding something monumental. Someone named Anna had written this one. She spoke of a secret that had to be buried, of a decision made under pressure, of a truth too heavy to share. And Eli. He was the center of it all. The more I read, the more that name stopped sounding like mine and started feeling like a question. Who was Ellie? And if these letters were about a secret involving someone named Ellie before I was even born, then who the hell was I? I didn't remember climbing down from the attic. I just remember standing in the kitchen with the box in my hands, heart jackhammering against my ribs. I waited for my mom to come in from the backyard, where she was pruning rose bushes like she always did after Dad left for work. When she saw the box, something shifted behind her eyes, like a wall she'd kept up for years had crumbled in one glance. She didn't say anything. She didn't even look surprised, just sat down at the table and whispered, "You weren't supposed to find those." That's when I knew. My world, my family, everything I believed about who I was, it wasn't what it seemed. I didn't even ask right away. I sat across from her, box between us like a bomb we were both afraid to touch. She picked up the top letter with trembling fingers and said, "I was going to tell you when you turned 18. Your father didn't agree. He thought it was better to let the past sleep. But now," she swallowed. "No, it's awake." She told me things that didn't make sense at first. Names I'd never heard before. A story about a cousin who wasn't a cousin, a sister who wasn't a sister. A summer in 1997 that ended with a hospital room and a crying baby. A baby they didn't expect. A baby who wasn't supposed to be raised by the people who brought him into the world. "You were born to someone else," she said quietly. "Someone who couldn't keep you." And just like that, the floor of my life cracked open. My real mother. Her name was Anna, the woman from the letters. She was my mom's younger sister. She got pregnant at 19. My grandparents sent her away for her own good, the way rich families do when shame threatens to tarnish their reputation. Anna gave birth to me in a different city, under a different name, and when she came back, she wasn't a mother anymore. She was just Aunt Anna, the one with the sad smile who never stayed long for birthdays. I'd always thought she just didn't like kids. Now I knew she couldn't look at me without breaking. And my dad, he was in on it from the start. He signed the papers. He raised me as his own. But he wasn't my father, not by blood. The man who was, nobody knew. Anna never said. She refused to tell even after all these years. That part of the puzzle might never be filled in. I thought I'd feel betrayed. And maybe I did, a little. But more than anything, I felt untethered. Like a kite whose string had snapped mid-flight. Who was I, really? A lie wrapped in good intentions. A secret folded in layers of love and guilt. That night, I sat on the porch alone. The stars were out, and the string lights I'd gone looking for were now glowing softly above me. Funny how a few bulbs can still shine even when half the string is burnt out. I held the last letter in my lap. It was unopened, dated exactly 18 years ago. The day I was born. I hadn't read it yet. I was afraid to. But I also knew I had to. The ribbon on this one was different, red instead of blue. Like she'd meant it to stand out. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The paper crackled like old leaves. And then, in Anna's familiar cursive, I read, "To the boy who will one day find this. If you're reading this, then they finally told you the truth. And now, I need you to know the rest." And what came next changed everything. To the boy who will one day find this. If you're reading this, then they finally told you the truth. And now, I need you to know the rest. That's how the last letter began, and it didn't start gently. It didn't cradle me in apologies or offer soft reassurances. It dove straight into the current of things left buried for nearly 2 decades. Anna's words had the weight of someone who had held in a scream for years. Someone who had finally exhaled on the page. Her handwriting was shaky in parts. Some ink smudged like tears had blurred it, though whether hers or someone else's, I'd never know. And as I read, time folded in on itself. She started with a memory. July 3, 1997. Fireworks. The scent of grilled corn and beer. A summer party thrown at the family lake house where everything looked perfect if you didn't look too closely. That was the night she met him. My biological father. She never named him in the letter. She just called him the boy who wasn't supposed to matter. He was older, not by much, but just enough to be reckless. She said he had a voice like smoke and a laugh that sounded like he wasn't afraid of anything, not even consequence. She loved him fast and full, like she was trying to outrun the life everyone had already mapped out for her. It lasted less than a month. Then came silence. Then came 2 pink lines on a test she'd taken in a drugstore bathroom stall. She told no one at first. Not even my mom. But secrets like that have a way of leaking out, especially in families that like to pretend nothing ever goes wrong. By September, everyone knew. My grandparents were livid. Not because their daughter was scared and 17, but because the scandal could stain their spotless reputation. That's when the plan started forming. The exile, the whispers, the calls to lawyers. Anna fought. Not hard enough to win, she admitted, but hard enough to carry the bruises of it for the rest of her life. She was sent away to a place for girls in trouble, which she said always sounded more like a prison than a refuge. She gave birth to me in the winter, in a hospital room with a broken radiator and snow piling against the windows. My mom, her sister, was there too. Not because she wanted to take me, but because she wanted to keep Anna from breaking. But then something changed. Anna said it happened in a moment, a single second. She was holding me, exhausted and shaking, and she saw the way my mom looked at me, like I was the missing piece to something she'd never admitted was broken. My parents had tried to have children for years, she explained. Failed IVF, a miscarriage, a silence that had lived between them longer than I'd been alive. So when I was born, pink and squalling and uninvited, I became possibility. Anna made the decision she'd never stop regretting. She gave me to them. "You were never a mistake," she wrote. "But I let them erase me from your beginning because I thought it would save you." And then came the part that didn't make sense. The part that twisted something deep inside me. She didn't want it to be forever. That was the plan, she said. Temporary guardianship. A year or two, just until she finished school, got a job, could take me back. But something shifted. Papers were signed. Visits grew less frequent. The family made it harder. My grandparents decided it was better this way. My dad, who never raised his voice, raised it then. "He deserves stability," he said. "We can give him a name, a future." They changed mine. They changed everything. Anna said the last time she tried to fight, she was told she'd never win. She didn't have the money, the influence, or the family backing. And somewhere in all that heartbreak, she stopped believing she was allowed to be my mother. So she became Aunt Anna, the strange, hovering presence at Christmas who always brought the best gifts but never stayed long enough to see them unwrapped. She ended the letter with something I wasn't expecting. "I left you one more piece. Something I've never shown anyone. If you're ready, it's waiting in the place they'd never look." At first, I didn't know what she meant. But then it clicked. The lake house. No one had been there since my grandfather died. It sat abandoned now, a memory sealed in cobwebs and dry rot. But when I was a kid, we spent every summer there. I remembered a trap door in the back of the pantry, one I'd only found once, and only because I dropped a bag of flour and watched it slide over the edge. It led to a crawl space that ran under the house, full of old chairs and paint cans and things no one wanted but couldn't bear to throw out. I went that weekend. Didn't tell anyone. Didn't ask. I drove through the rain, 4 hours on roads slick with spring runoff. The trees on either side of the highway blurred into streaks of green. When I pulled up to the lake house, everything felt smaller than I remembered. The porch sagged, shutters hung crooked, but it still smelled like cedar and old sunscreen. Inside, the air was thick and still. I walked straight to the pantry, heart pounding louder with each step, moved the shelf, pulled the wood, and there it was. The crawl space. I found the box in the far corner, wrapped in a trash bag, taped shut with layers of duct tape. It wasn't heavy, but it felt like it was. My fingers shook as I opened it. Inside was a journal, Anna's, every page filled, edge to edge with the pieces she couldn't fit into a letter. Photos, hospital bracelets, even a lock of baby hair. Mine, I guessed. She'd kept everything. Birth announcements she never sent. A birthday card for every year she wasn't there. Drawings she'd made of me from memory. The first time I lost a tooth. The first time I rode a bike. She'd written entries like she was still there, like she was talking to me through time. Today he turns 3. I wonder if he still has that dimple when he laughs. I saw him from the parking lot once. Just for a second. He was taller than I expected. I almost waved. Do you think he'll forgive me someday for watching his life from behind glass? I didn't cry. Not right away. I just sat there in the dust, flipping page after page, trying to understand how I could live a whole life never knowing someone had been loving me from so far away. She hadn't vanished. She hadn't stopped caring. She had simply been erased. I stayed at the lake house that night, curled on the floor with like a child with a bedtime story. I read every word, some twice, some aloud. When the morning light seeped through the boarded windows, I felt different. Not healed, not whole, but recalibrated. I drove home with the journal seat belted beside me, and for the first time, I realized I didn't feel angry. Not at Anna, not even at my parents. just full of a kind of quiet grief I didn't have a name for. The grief of knowing your origin stories were written without your consent. Back home, I left the journal hidden. Not in the attic. Not in my room. I didn't want to risk someone finding it and trying to twist the truth again. That night, I asked Mom, "Did you know she was writing to me all those years?" She shook her head slowly. "We made her promise not to. We said it would confuse you. Maybe we were wrong." I didn't respond. I just went to bed and stared at the ceiling for hours. And then I made a choice. The next morning, I called Anna. Her number was still in my phone from holidays. My hand trembled the entire time the phone rang. When she answered, her voice caught like she knew who it was. I said only one thing. "I got your letter." Huh? She didn't speak for a long time. Then, in a voice more fragile than I remembered, she whispered, "I've been waiting 18 years to hear you say that." And in that moment, the dam broke. But the flood hadn't even begun. There's a strange silence that follows after a truth has been exposed. It's not the kind that soothes you or wraps you in comfort. No, this silence is sharp-edged, like the hush in the air after a scream, when the world waits to see what comes next. After that phone call with Anna, I lived in that silence. The kind where every word spoken felt like it was being measured, weighed, and dissected by something bigger than any of us. I'd cracked the seal on a part of our family no one dared to acknowledge, and there was no way to know what I now knew. And more terrifying, there was no way to feel it. We talked again the next day. Anna and I mean, the first conversation had been little more than tears and half sentences. The second was longer, more real. She asked about my life. Not the curated version Mom and Dad gave her at Christmas, but the real stuff. My favorite subject in school, the music I liked, the way I always felt like I didn't quite fit. She knew some of it already. She'd been watching from a distance for years. But now she was hungry for detail, like she'd been starving and suddenly found herself at a feast. And I was hungry too, for answers, for pieces of myself I didn't even know were missing until I saw where they used to be. Anna didn't try to apologize, not in the way people usually do. There was no groveling, no plea for forgiveness. Instead, she just said, "I should have fought harder. I thought I was doing what was best for you, but maybe I was just doing what was safest for me." That hit harder than I expected, because in her voice I didn't hear blame. I heard pain. Regret that had aged into something quieter, more resigned. And I realized then that this wasn't going to be one of those stories with a clean, happy reunion. This was going to be messy, complicated, the kind of thing you carry in your bones for the rest of your life. I didn't tell my parents I was talking to her. Not yet. I needed space to understand it myself before I let them into it. But the tension in the house thickened with every passing day. My mom moved slower, glanced over her shoulder more. My dad avoided eye contact like I could see through him. The walls, once filled with the harmless noise of routine, now echoed with things unsaid. Then one night, it happened. I came home late. I'd gone to sit by the river. The one where I used to skip rocks as a kid, back when I believed all questions had answers if you just asked them the right way. When I walked in, the lights were still on, and my parents were sitting at the table. Both of them, together. That never happened unless something was wrong. The box from the attic sat between them. My heart stopped. They had gone looking for it. My dad was the first to speak. "Ali, we need to talk." I stood frozen, keys still in hand. "You went through my stuff." "You went through ours first," my mom said, but her voice wasn't angry. It was tired. Worn down to the threads, I sat down slowly. The table between us felt more like a battlefield than a piece of furniture. "We never meant to hurt you," my dad began. "One Anna, when she gave you to us, we thought we were giving you a better life." "You didn't give me a better life," I snapped before I could stop myself. "You gave me a false one." The silence. Mom's eyes welled up. "You're our son." "No, I'm your nephew. You just never told me." They both looked like they'd been slapped. And maybe they had, with a truth they'd spent 18 years trying to outrun. "I'm not saying you didn't love me," I said, softer now. "But don't tell me it wasn't a lie, because it was. We were afraid," Mom whispered. "Afraid that if you knew the truth, you'd stop loving us." I wanted to scream, but all I said was, "The truth doesn't take away love. Hiding it does." But we sat there for a long time. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. Eventually, I stood, walked out, got in my car and drove nowhere in particular, just away, because sometimes space is the only way to let the fire cool before it burns everything to ash. The next few weeks were a blur. I kept talking to Anna. She told me stories about her own childhood, about how she and Mom used to play make-believe under the porch, about the way their dad used to hum Sinatra when he was drunk, about the first time she got her heart broken, and the second, and then me. The heartbreak that never stopped. It was like I was learning a whole new language, one built out of loss and resilience. And the more I learned, the more I realized that love doesn't always come in the form we expect. Sometimes it looks like sacrifice, sometimes like silence, and sometimes it wears the face of a stranger who knows your middle name. Anna and I decided to meet. It felt like the final step in a process I hadn't agreed to but couldn't avoid. She drove in from 3 hours away. We picked a diner on the edge of town. Nothing fancy. Neutral ground. When I walked in, she was already there. Sitting in a corner booth, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee like it was an anchor. She looked older than I remembered, but softer too. There was a kind of stillness in her that reminded me of late-night oceans. Deep calm, but dangerous if you weren't careful. When our eyes met, she smiled. "You look just like him." I sat down. "Who?" She hesitated. "Your father." It was the first time she'd said it outright. My biological father, the mystery man from the lake house. And for the first time, I didn't just want a name. I wanted everything. So I asked. She looked down at her coffee. "His name was Caleb. We met once. That night, he didn't know I was pregnant. I tried to find him after, but he'd left town. No address, no number. Just gone." "Do you think he ever knew?" She shook her head. "No, and maybe that's for the best. He wasn't ready. I wasn't either." We sat in silence for a while, then talked about nothing. TV shows, coffee preferences, the way the waitress kept mixing up our orders. But under it all was this thrum of recognition, like finding a book you didn't know you'd written half of. When it was time to go, she reached into her purse and handed me an envelope. "It's for when you're ready." I waited until I got home to open it. Inside was a single photo, a picture of her holding a newborn baby, me. And on the back, in faded ink, she'd written, "For the day he knows who he is." That night, I didn't sleep. I just lay there, the photo on my chest, thinking about identity, about how we build it from stories we're told, memories we inherit, truths we choose to believe. And I realized something. I wasn't just Anna's son. I wasn't just my parents' child. I was both. And neither. And maybe that was okay. But as I closed my eyes, one last thought whispered through me like wind through a cracked window. If Anna was willing to carry this secret for 18 years, who else knew? And what else hadn't they told me? The next secret was already waiting. And it wouldn't stay buried for long. You'd think once the biggest secret in your life explodes into daylight, everything that follows would be easier. Like once the fire has burned down the house, there's nothing left to catch flame. But secrets are never solitary creatures. They travel in packs. And once you find one, the rest start to whisper from the corners. Soft at first, then louder until you can't ignore them. That's what happened to me. Just when I thought I'd unraveled the hardest truth about who I was, I discovered the truth had roots. And those roots ran deeper than I ever imagined. It started with a voicemail. Not from Anna, not from my parents. From a number I didn't recognize. A landline, the kind only older people still have. I played it twice before it fully landed. "Ely, this is Margaret." The woman's voice rasped. "I know this might seem strange, but I was a friend of your grandmother's. There's something you need to know, something Ruth never told your mother or your aunt. Please call me back. It's important." I sat there, phone still in my hand, a cold sweat prickling down my spine. Margaret. I vaguely remembered the name. Grandma Ruth had a bridge group. 3 or 4 women who wore pastel sweaters and drank white wine at noon. I hadn't seen any of them since Ruth's funeral last year. They were the kind of people who vanished when the casseroles ran out. I called back. She answered on the first ring. "I didn't think you would," she said. "You sounded just like your grandfather on that machine. Made my heart jump." "What is this about?" I asked. A pause. Then, "It's about why Anna was sent away, and why your mother fought so hard to keep her quiet afterward." And my mouth went dry. I hadn't told her anything. Not about the attic, the letters, the truth about Anna and me. But somehow Margaret already knew. "You need to come see me," she said. "This isn't something I can explain over the phone." I hesitated. Every cell in my body screamed caution. But curiosity has a gravity all its own. I went the next day. Margaret lived in a retirement complex 2 towns over. The kind with beige hallways and framed puzzles in the common areas. Her room smelled like violets and old magazines. She was sitting in a recliner by the window, knitting something that looked like a sock, but might have been a sleeve. "You're taller than I expected," she said as I stepped inside. Then again, so was your grandfather. Carried himself like he was hiding something. Turns out he was. I sat down across from her, unsure of what to say. She looked at me with pale blue eyes that seemed to see more than they should. And then, without preamble, she said, "You weren't the first." The words hit like a slap. I blinked. "What?" "You weren't the first child Ruth tried to hide." I stared at her, heart pounding. What are you talking about?" She sighed and set the yarn aside. Her hands, though spotted with age, moved with precision as she reached for a manila envelope tucked beside her chair. "Your grandmother Ruth," she began, "had a sister, Judith. Nobody talks about her anymore, because Judith disappeared in 1963, but not before she gave birth to a baby girl." I leaned forward, every part of me suddenly alert. "Who?" Margaret's lips trembled. "Your mother." The room tilted. I gripped the armrest, as if anchoring myself to something solid. "No," I said. "That can't be right. My mom was Ruth's daughter." "Legally, yes," Margaret said. "But biologically, no. She was born to Judith in secret. Ruth took her in, pretended she'd adopted a baby from out of state. Back then, it was easier to rewrite the truth if you had money and friends at City Hall." I shook my head. "That doesn't make any sense. Why would no one tell her?" "Because Judith wasn't like Ruth," she said. "She was unstable, impulsive. There were whispers about the father. Some said it was a neighbor, others that it was someone married. Either way, Judith couldn't raise a child. Ruth thought she was doing the right thing, just like your mother thought she was doing the right thing with you." The air around me felt thin. I stood and paced the room, needing to move, needing to do something. "So my mother doesn't even know who her real mother is?" "I'm not sure," Margaret said quietly. "She might suspect." But Ruth was very convincing. She burned anything that could prove it. Letters, certificates, pictures. Except one, and she handed me the envelope. Inside was a photograph. 2 young women on a beach, barefoot, wind blown, laughing, Ruth and Judith, and between them, swaddled in a blanket, a baby. On the back, someone had scrawled in fading ink, "June 1963, welcome, little Kate." Kate? Kate? My mother, the baby born of secrecy, just like me. I left Margaret's place with the photo tucked inside my jacket and my mind spinning. If what she said was true, then my entire family tree had been constructed on lies. Not just mine, everyone's. It wasn't just my identity that had been tampered with. It was an entire lineage warped into fiction, like a book where the first chapter had been torn out and rewritten in a stranger's hand. I drove straight to Anna. She lived in a modest apartment above a bookstore, the kind with creaky stairs and plants in every window. When I knocked, she opened the door with eyes already red. She'd been crying. "You saw Margaret," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded and stepped inside. She didn't offer tea or small talk. Just led me to the couch and sat down across from me like we were two detectives comparing case files. I handed her the photo. She stared at it for a long time. "She doesn't know, does she?" I asked. "No," Anna whispered. "Ruth made sure of that, Gut." "You've known this whole time." She nodded, barely. I felt something rupture inside me. "So we're both second-generation secrets." That made her laugh, bitter and soft. "I guess we are." I thought back to every childhood moment when I'd felt different, like I didn't belong. Now I realized I'd inherited it. The displacement, the erasure. It was our family's legacy. Every woman in our bloodline had been erased in some way. My grandmother, by rewriting her sister's story. My mother, by living a lie without knowing it. Anna, by being stripped of her child. And me, by being passed off like a family heirloom too fragile to speak of. "We have to tell her," I said. Anna looked up. "Are you sure? She deserves to know who she is, just like I did, but it will hurt her." I shook my head. Truth always does, but lies rot everything they touch. We sat in silence after that, the photo between us like a fragile bridge, and in that moment, I made another decision. This ends with me. No more secrets, no more silence, no more pretending that love is best when it's clean and convenient. Love is messy. Love is honest. And if our family was going to survive this, we had to start telling the truth, even if it shattered everything. But before I could tell my mom, I needed to understand something else. One final piece that didn't add up. If Ruth had erased Judith, what happened to her? Where did she go? And why had no one seen her since 1963? Because the way Margaret had said, disappeared. It hadn't sounded metaphorical. It had sounded like a warning. And warnings never come without a reason. The word disappeared stuck in my mind like a splinter, not cleft or moved away, or even cran off. Disappeared, a word with weight, with absence embedded in its very bones. People vanish every day, sure. But when a family member vanishes and no one speaks of it for over 50 years, that's not disappearance. That's erasure. And erasure, I'd come to learn, was our family's favorite tradition. I couldn't stop thinking about Judith, my mother's real mother, my biological grandmother, the woman who'd been painted in soft shadows and hard lines, impulsive, unstable, unfit. Ruth had built that story brick by brick, and we'd all lived in its walls without ever questioning the foundation. But now I knew better. Now I knew what silence could hide. And I needed to know what had really happened to her. I started with the easy stuff. Old newspapers, obituaries, public records. Most of it was useless. A few mentions of Judith Harlow in the early 60s school plays. A letter to the editor about the rising cost of milk. A photo of her and Ruth volunteering at a church bake sale. And then nothing. Like she'd stepped off the edge of the world. No marriage license. No death certificate. No forwarding address. Like she'd been swallowed whole. I asked Anna, but she shook her head. I was only a baby when she left. I barely remember her voice, just the scent of her perfume, violets and cigarette smoke. She paused, eyes distant. I asked Mom once. She told me Judith had moved to California. That was the family code for exile. California was where the inconvenient went. But Judith hadn't gone to California. I was certain of it, so I went back to Margaret. She was expecting me. I wondered how long it would take. She said, already pouring tea. "You're like your mother that way." Kate never could leave a mystery alone. "Why didn't you tell her?" I asked. "Why didn't anyone?" Margaret sat, creaking gently into her chair. "Because Ruth told us not to." And Ruth didn't ask things. She decided them. What happened to Judith? She hesitated, then opened a drawer in her side table and pulled out an old leather-bound notebook. The pages were brittle, yellowed with age. "These are Judith's. She used to come to my house late at night, crocking, writing. She was unraveling, even back then." I opened the book carefully. The handwriting was jagged, frantic. each page more chaotic than the last. Snippets of poems, fragments of letters, doodles in the margins. But one page near the center was different. Cleaner, almost deliberate. They say I'm not fit, that the baby would be better off with Ruth. But they don't understand. She wanted a second chance. She wanted to pretend she could do motherhood better this time around, like a redo. But this child is mine, and I will not disappear quietly. That was dated August 29, 1963. 3 days later, Judith was gone. I looked at Margaret. Where did she go? She stared at me for a long time, then whispered, "I think Ruth made her go." There was talk about a place. Not an asylum, not officially, but close enough. Somewhere out in the woods, private, expensive. For women who didn't behave the way they were supposed to. You think she was institutionalized. Well, I think she was buried. Margaret said, her voice thin and shaking. Buried alive in a place that called itself healing. That night, I sat with that notebook in my lap like it was a living thing. I couldn't stop running my thumb over Judith's words. She hadn't been unstable. She'd been desperate. Silenced. Another woman in our family crushed under the weight of someone else's idea of what was acceptable. And Ruth, she hadn't been protecting us. She'd been rewriting history. Again. I started digging into old state records. Private psychiatric institutions, many of which had since shut down or been quietly absorbed into state systems. It took weeks. And then, a break. One tiny, forgotten file buried deep in the archives of a defunct hospital in upstate New York. Judith H., admitted Sept. 2, 1963, discharged at no record. The address of the facility was long abandoned, torn down, overgrown. But that was all I needed. I went. It took 4 hours and a full tank of gas. The drive twisted through forest roads, cell service vanishing with every mile. The hospital ruins sat like a skeleton on a forgotten hill, rusted gates yawning open. Ivy crawling over crumbling bricks. There was nothing official left. No signs, no fences, just time and nature reclaiming what had once been someone's personal prison. I found the patient records building by chance, half buried in collapsed beams. Inside were moldy folders, decayed furniture, the remains of lives long forgotten. But tucked in a rusted filing cabinet, behind a drawer warped shut by decades of damp, was a list, faded ink. Dated 1964. Patients reassigned to new care homes after the facility closed. Next to Judith's name was a forwarding address. It was a rural hospice facility in Vermont. I didn't wait. 2 days later, I was in Vermont, standing in front of a small, tidy building with white siding and a wraparound porch. It smelled like pine and lavender. The nurse at the front desk looked at me kindly when I asked. "Judith Harlow," she repeated. "Oh, yes. She passed away just last year. Quietly. She didn't have any family listed." Something broke inside me. "I'm her grandson," I said. She didn't even know me. The nurse's eyes softened. She was very quiet, but she used to talk about a baby, said she'd had one taken from her. Sometimes she thought we were Ruth. Sometimes she just sat in the garden humming old songs. She took me to her room. It was small, sparse. A single bed, a rocking chair, a worn quilt folded at the foot. But on the windowsill sat a tiny potted violet, and next to it, a photo, aged and faded, the image barely visible. It was the same one Margaret had shown me. Ruth, Judith, and baby Kate. But in this one, Judith had circled the baby in red ink, and beneath it, she'd scrawled, "Mine." I stood there, trying to breathe, trying to hold it together. This woman, my grandmother, had spent 50 years waiting for someone to remember she existed. Waiting for a knock that never came, for justice that never arrived. And all I could think was, I was too late. But then the nurse handed me something. "She left this," she said. Said it was for her baby, or the baby's baby. She wasn't always clear. But we kept it, just in case. It was a journal, Judith's second one. And on the first page, she had written, "For the child they told me I'd forget. For the blood they tried to erase. May the truth find its voice in you." I took it home night. I sat with Anna and showed her everything. Margaret's notes, the hospital records, the journal, the photo. We said nothing for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "We have to tell Kate." I nodded. It was time. But none of us were ready for what happened next. Because when we told my mother the truth, her truth, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood up from the table, eyes glassy, and said, "I already knew." And that changed everything. I already knew. That's what my mother said the night we told her everything. And in that moment, the world didn't shatter. It slowed. Like the air itself forgot how to move. Her voice was calm, unshaken, as if she'd been rehearsing those 3 words for years. Maybe she had. Maybe she'd said them to herself 1,000 times, waiting for the day someone else would finally bring her the script. Anna stared at her. You knew." Mom nodded slowly, her eyes locked on the photo of Judith and the baby. Herself, circled in red ink. Not everything. Not the journals. Not the hospital. But the whispers, the way Ruth would freeze when I asked questions. There were hints, pieces. I guess I never had the courage to follow them all the way. "You never said anything," I whispered. "How could I?" she said, turning toward me. "My entire life was built on a lie they told me with a smile. We adopted you out of love," Ruth would say. "You were chosen. But chosen by whom? Judith didn't choose this. She was erased. I was a blank slate they filled with the version of me they could control." Anna stepped forward, eyes brimming. "Kate, she loved you." "Judith," she tried. "I believe you," Mom said, voice thin. "But love wasn't enough, was it?" No one spoke after that. The room held its breath, thick with everything said and unsaid. Then, without another word, Mom picked up the journals and walked to her room. She didn't close the door. She just sat on the edge of the bed and began to read. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. Not tense. Not explosive. Just subdued. Like we were walking through a house that had caught fire, but the embers hadn't realized it yet. Everyone processed differently. Anna called me every evening but never stayed on the line long. I think part of her still didn't believe the truth had finally found daylight. That it hadn't turned into ash the moment it was spoken aloud. Mom read all of Judith's journals. Every page. Sometimes twice. I'd find her in the kitchen at 2 a.m., tracing the edge of a paragraph like it was a wound. Some nights she'd cry. Other nights she'd laugh. Short, bitter bursts of disbelief at how deep the deception had gone. I didn't press. I didn't need to. I understood the pain of reassembling your identity from fragments someone else tried to bury. But then something happened that no one expected. Mom started writing. It began with little notes, on the backs of receipts inside the margins of books, then longer entries in a spiral-bound notebook. Eventually, full pages. She didn't tell us what they were at first. Just kept them close, like a secret she was finally choosing to hold on to, instead of letting someone else decide when it should be taken. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled across the kitchen table, she handed me the notebook. "This is for you," she said. I opened to the first page. It was titled, "The Truth My Mother Never Got to Tell Me," and it was written not as a story, but as a letter. To me. She wrote about what it felt like to grow up with questions she wasn't allowed to ask. About the ache of never quite belonging to the woman who tucked her in at night. About the emptiness that lived inside her chest, one that only began to shrink when she held me for the first time and saw the same confusion in my eyes that she'd carried all her life. "So, I didn't choose this truth," she wrote, "but I choose what to do with it now. And I choose to give it to you so you don't have to wonder anymore." It broke me, but it also healed something. Because this was the first truth in our family that wasn't locked away in an attic or scribbled in desperation. This was the truth written in the light. We decided, together, to do something with all of it. We compiled the journals, the letters, the photographs, every scrap of memory that had survived the silences. And we made a book, not for publication, not for fame, but for us, for the generations after us, so that no child in our family would ever again have to learn who they were from whispers and secrets and funerals. We titled it, "The Unspoken." And on the inside cover, We printed a simple dedication for those who were erased and those brave enough to find them again. But the story didn't end there. Months passed. Life returned in its own odd way, the quiet routines, the ordinary. But there was a change, a softness in my mother's tone, a new depth in Anna's laughter. I began visiting Anna more often, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to know her, to learn who she was beyond the roles other people had forced her into. She was funny and strange and wise in ways pain often makes a person. We started celebrating birthdays again, this time mine and hers together, and every year she gives me a new letter. Not to make up for the ones she couldn't send, but to build something new, something forward. Then something unexpected happened. It was a Wednesday, rainy. I'd just gotten off work when a man showed up at the house. Tall, nervous, holding a letter. "I'm sorry," he said, eyes flicking toward the mailbox, then back to me. "Are you Ellie?" I nodded. He handed me the letter. I think we're related." His name was Thomas. He was in his 40s, and he'd spent 2 years trying to trace his adoption records back to a woman named Judith Harlow. He was her son, born in 1961, 2 years before my mother. Another secret child, another life erased. I stood there, letter in hand, stunned, then invited him in. We sat for hours, piecing together timelines, comparing journal entries. And it all fit. The dates, the cities, the pattern. Judith hadn't given up one child. She'd been forced to give up 2. Thomas had grown up always feeling haunted by someone he didn't know, someone missing. And now, somehow, that emptiness made sense. When I told my mother, she didn't cry this time. She laughed. A strange, wild, cathartic laugh that shook her shoulders and startled the dog. And then she said, "I have a brother, after all this time. I have a brother." And when they met, it was like watching puzzle pieces click into place. Not perfect, not smooth, but right. That was the final crack in the glass. After that, the healing wasn't just a concept. It became real, tangible. Anna and my mom started meeting every Sunday, sometimes with Thomas, sometimes just the 2 of them. They talked, cooked, painted old memories over with newer, brighter ones. They were rebuilding, not what had been taken, but what could still be made. As for me, I stopped calling it a broken family. Now, I call it what it is, from mosaic. 1,000 shattered truths rearranged into something strange and beautiful. And every piece, even the ones we tried to forget, now has a place. Looking back, I understand now why that first letter mattered so much. Why Anna risked everything to leave it behind. Not just for me to find the truth, but to make sure the truth didn't end with me. That it echoed and multiplied and grew louder than the silence ever was. And sometimes I still go back to the attic, not to dig, just to sit, to remember where the story started, where I found a box full of letters I was never supposed to read. And in doing so, I found myself. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe and like the video.